Good morning and welcome to World News, coming to you live from Warsaw. I'm Salia Strzemska. Prime Minister Donald Tusk will announce a new economic strategy for Poland today. The document is said to include, among other initiatives, plans to remove much of the red tape on the construction of wind farms. The project was unveiled by Prime Minister Tusk back in January, along with the slogan, Poland's Breakthrough Year. Attending the meeting, apart from Donald Tusk, will be the Polish Finance Minister, Andrzej Domański. In the last couple of days, the Polish Ministry of Finance, along with the Ministry of State Assets, have been putting the final touches on the plan, the details of which are known only to a selected few in the government.
Poland's breakthrough year. Tomorrow we will talk about how our country might soon become the best and safest place on earth. After all, the vast majority of Poles, despite Poland's enemies and eternal naysayers, want peace, growth and prosperity. I believe in us.
Sunday exit polls in Kosovo showed Prime Minister Albin Kurti's self-determination movement in first place with over 42% of the vote. This, however, is not enough to form a majority government, and so the Prime Minister's party will have to form a coalition. The self-determination movement will now hold talks to create a coalition in the 120-seat parliament. Among the main opposition parties is the Democratic Party of Kosovo, which polled at over 22%, and whose main leaders have been accused of war crimes at the Hague Tribunal. Trailing them is the centre-right Democratic League of Kosovo, which campaigned on strengthening ties with the EU and the US and got just over 17% of the vote. Moving across the Atlantic, US President Donald Trump has said it is too early to talk about the effects of his conversation with Vladimir Putin. On a different note, Trump has also said that on Monday he will be announcing that Washington will impose 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports. Here's more.
If we are talking, I don't want to tell you about the conversation, it's too early, but I do believe we're making progress. We want to stop the Ukraine-Russia war, and I want to stop it just because I hate to see all these young people being killed. The soldiers are being killed by the hundreds of thousands. I don't want U.S. steel being owned by a foreign country. They can have they don't have a controlling. They have an investment. All they're going to have is an investment. Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum, sir?
Aluminum too.
10%?
25%.
25 for aluminum as well.
25 for both.
To see how the news about Trump-Putin conversation were received in Ukraine, we have a report from our correspondent in Kyiv, Oskar Terji.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has given a wide-ranging interview with the British news channel ITV News, where he discussed many things, but not Donald Trump's specific remarks about having a phone call with Vladimir Putin. But President Zelensky did go into detail and emphasized that security was important and that there could be no deal on Ukraine, on solving the war in Ukraine without Ukraine at the table, and one that respected Ukraine's sovereign rights and gave them security guarantees to prevent Russia from invading again, saying freezing the conflict without these guarantees would only encourage Putin, with Zelensky saying a frozen conflict will lead to Putin coming back again with his aggression. Now, on Trump, President Zelensky did remark on President Trump, saying he needs not just to finish the war, he needs to make sure that Putin has no chance of coming back with a war against us. So, look, lots to be done there, but President Zelensky is certainly not going into any kinds of negotiations without emphasizing Ukraine's security needs. Oskar Terji reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia were integrated into the European energy grid this weekend after they severed the last remaining ties to Russian and Belarusian networks. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has praised the move and said, and here's a quote, "The chains of power lines linking you to hostile neighbors are a thing of the past. This is freedom from threats." Here's more.
After decoupling from the Russian energy grid on Saturday, the Baltic states have now been connected to Europe.
Moments ago, I received great news. The synchronization of the Baltic states' electricity system with the continental European system has been successfully completed.
We did it. It took us some time, it took us some effort, but we did it. And I think that we are closing one chapter in our history and we are opening a new one.
It is the final step towards emancipation from the post-Soviet sphere of dependence, in this case, in the energy sector. It is also an important day for Poland, since we serve as a bridge between the Baltic states and the rest of Europe.
Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are former Soviet republics. They had been highly dependent on supplies from Russia up until the invasion of Ukraine. Until Saturday, they relied on the Russian grid to stabilize the network and avoid outages.
There has been quite a successful information campaign in all three Baltic states to explain people how important it is, and that the prices, for example, in Latvia this year will not change.
Subsequent investments and links to the Baltic's allies made it possible to decouple from Russia. Connectors were built in the sea and on the land. The Baltic states now face the challenge of securing these links.
In just 2 months, several cables linking your countries to neighbors have been damaged. There's a pattern, and we cannot ignore it.
The threat to underwater infrastructure in the Baltic reached a critical point after a number of underwater links were found to have been allegedly severed by Russian Shadow Fleet vessels. Experts and policymakers from the Baltic states then warned that the suspicious incidents could have been deliberate and aimed at disrupting the planned decoupling from the Russian energy grid.
The Baltic states are very concerned about their own security, and they believe that Russia's war in Ukraine is not going to stay there, and that Russia will continue to also challenge the Baltic states. As a matter of fact, Putin doesn't need to roll on tanks and jets there. All he really has to do is to use its hybrid warfare activities there, which he has already been using.
The rise in hybrid operations against EU member states in the Baltic region has prompted a discussion on how the EU should respond to security threats.
Will we find additional money? That is broader discussion about defense and so on. We shall see. We are looking for some possibilities, but definitely protection of critical infrastructure is part of our preparedness for the whole defense of European continent.
Critical undersea infrastructure is being guarded as part of the Baltic Sentry, a NATO maritime patrol mission intended to deter further incidents.
In his evening address, President of Ukraine praised the Baltic states for decoupling from the Russian energy grid. At the same time, Volodymyr Zelensky appealed to the rest of the European Union to follow suit and break the last remaining ties, binding them with the Russian Federation.
The Baltic states, good friends of Ukraine, have disconnected from the Russian energy grid. Their energy systems are now fully synchronized with the European continental system. Ukraine had already done this in 2022, and now the Baltic states have also freed themselves from this dependence. Moscow will no longer be able to use energy as a weapon against the Baltic states. This also means that Europe has become even more cohesive. This is exactly the course all of us in Europe should continue to follow across the continent. This is particularly relevant for Central European countries, those that still have agreements with Russia.
Incumbent German Chancellor Olaf Scholz clashed with his rival Friedrich Merz in a long-anticipated televised debate on Sunday. Parliamentary elections in Germany will be held on February 23rd. Speaking about migration policy, Merz accused Scholz of losing touch with reality. Take a look at this fragment of the debate.
Mr. Chancellor, I am sorry, but you are glossing over the situation, and you are describing a situation that has little, I don't want to say nothing, but very little to do with the reality in our country.
I think what Mr. Merz is proposing here is against German interests. It is against everything that is of the utmost importance for our national welfare, for the welfare of our country. And that's why I say, why should we be so stupid? I say it with these clear words. Why should we be so stupid that at the moment when Germany, under my leadership and after many, many years, has finally achieved what we have long fought for, we would allow others to undo it?
Schultz, please, you don't live in this world. What you are talking about here is a fairy tale castle. It has hardly anything to do with what is happening in the reality of cities and municipalities in Germany.
Europe's far-right leaders gathered for the annual meeting in Madrid, Spain, over the weekend. And one slogan dominated the agenda: Make Europe Great Again. What exactly would that entail? Here's a report.
Every election that comes to Europe must fall one after the other like dominoes, as if the political game were lining up in an inexorable movement.
The message of the French national rally's Marine Le Pen was met with cheers and vivats from fellow far-right European pundits as they gathered in Madrid, Spain. Poland was also represented by Krzysztof Bosak, deputy speaker of the Polish parliament and the leader of the national movement.
We will reject all this EU nonsense like climate policy, European Green Deal, migrant compact and much more.
But one message rang to overshadow all others: Make Europe Great Again. The similarity to US President Donald Trump's tagline is not coincidental. Europe's far right is determined to overrule the Brussels consensus.
Trump's tornado has changed the world in just 2 weeks. An era is over. Yesterday we were the heretics, today we are the mainstream.
Unsurprisingly, the unifying call of all far-right leaders, from Washington through to Madrid, comes in the form of a staunch anti-immigration rhetoric.
Migration policy is out of control, and the bottomless pit of immigration is draining our coffers and filling our prisons.
We are united by the defense of our borders, because high fences make good neighbors.
And Europeans have much to learn from President Trump, who immediately upon taking office moved to reverse US immigration and asylum-seeking policies, which experts say brings widespread consequences for the post-war status quo.
The United States has been a pillar of the liberal international order for as long as we've known it, in the last 75 or so years.
Observers also point out that the US example might set a precedent in motion with far-reaching effects on EU lawmaking.
Increasing number of deputations, which you can call, if you will, the Trumpization of the migration policy, something which is called euphemistically applying national law as a matter of priority if European regulations do not work, which is basically accepting the possibility of violating EU law.
Though some warn that rallying around US conservatives is likely to bring undesirable effects.
For the Trump administration, this would be a perfect setup if Europe is divided into those very small countries, and Trump can, like he does with Canada, with Panama, with Denmark, can pick and impose his will on each of those small countries.
And the US is not the only democracy where the rejection of Western values is dominating political debate. Intensifying clashes between liberalism and the far right are happening across Europe. From Georgia,
police powers have been widely expanded, ban on temporary structures at all protests have been introduced, and in general we're witnessing the consolidation of authoritarian rule.
To Slovakia, where Prime Minister Fico's meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in late December led to protests in over 40 cities across the country.
What we demand is basically we reject Robert Fico's policies, we reject this attempt by his government to take us closer to Putin's Russia.
And with numerous elections approaching across Europe, from Germany in just a few weeks to Poland's presidential election scheduled for May, voters across the bloc will have to demonstrate a definitive rejection of these sentiments to preserve the unity of the EU.
French President Emmanuel Macron welcomed the Prime Minister of Canada at the Élysée Palace on Sunday. Their meeting precedes the two-day AI Action Summit scheduled to begin later today.
Speaking on the eve of the AI summit, French President Emmanuel Macron said that accessibility to the technology remains a key priority.
Europe will accelerate, France will accelerate, and therefore, for us, France, we announced tomorrow at this summit 109 billion euros of investment in artificial intelligence over the coming years.
The AI Action Summit will be attended by heads of state, CEOs and stakeholders. The main goal of the summit, according to the organizers, is to set out scientific foundations and standards for sustainable development and cooperation. Prime Minister Trudeau has reportedly said that AI development without compromising climate change goals of the G7 is a key priority.
It's essential and it's important, because not just it's going to transform our world, but how we do it thoughtfully, deliberately, responsibly is being decided right now.
On Thursday, France signed a contract with UAE, estimated to be worth between 30 and 50 billion euros, for the creation of data center megaproject in France. The data storage facility is considered an essential component in the AI technology race. And with this we conclude our news recap, but please stay tuned for more World Talks coming up next.